Prodigy Maker Show, episode 75, with yours truly, Chris Lewitt. It's great to be back with you guys. I've had a bit of a layoff, but I have a very good excuse. I've been busy working on not one, but two books. So I've been doing a ton of writing, and I have a new Secrets of Spanish Tennis 2 book coming out coinciding with the US Open, which is very exciting. I wrote The Secrets of Spanish Tennis in 2014, and now we have the second edition coming out with lots of updates and new chapters. I'm very excited about that. The book is all polished up and updated for about 10 years later. If you want to know the inside dope about Spanish tennis, how they do it, The Secrets of Spanish Tennis, that's the go-to book. So I've been getting that ready for final publication. That's coming out soon this year at the end of the summer, around the US Open time. And I have a new book that I've been obsessed with and writing early mornings, late at night, and it's just keeping me from doing many podcasts or videos. So I apologize for that. I know I have a loyal crew, loyal followers of the Prodigy Maker Show. So the new book is called Winning Pretty, or the working title is Winning Pretty. And it's a technique book. It's all about how to build beautiful technique, which is something that I know very well. I love, that's what I do for a living. I build beautiful technique, especially for young little superstar players. So the book is working title is tentatively Winning Pretty. Stay tuned for more on that. It's very exciting for me. I have the entire manuscript, first draft, pretty much written. It's over 80,000 words. It's going to be like 400 pages. I got to edit it down and polish it up. And I do have some exciting news and updates surrounding that book. I don't have a publishing date yet for that, but it's going to update my first book that I wrote, which was called the Tennis Technique Bible, which was many years ago, which had a lot of good information, but it was my first attempt at a book, and it was at this point, a lot of the information there is outdated. So that book is off the shelf now, and I have a brand new take on technique. There's a lot of biomechanics in the new book. There's a lot of visuals, a lot of models to help with development, and a lot of excellent technical drills in the book. So I'm super excited. I'm hoping that it will be the best technique book ever written, if I can polish it up and make it great. So stay tuned for that. Today's show is about prodigy making. After all, this is the Prodigy Maker Show. By the way, guys, I'm planning to bifurcate the podcast, and in the near future, we're going to have the Prodigy Maker Show, which is only going to focus on junior development. So all of the shows will be about prodigy making, elite junior development, building superstar champion young players, things like that, how to develop top juniors. That'll be this show. And then I'm going to have a show that's just dedicated to technique and biomechanics. And that will be titled with the book, as the book gets published, Winning Pretty. Probably the title of the podcast will be something like Winning Pretty, something about building beautiful world-class technique. And then we're going to have a separate podcast for The Secrets of Spanish Tennis, which is the other main book that I'm known for. So I'd like to have not just two, but three separate podcasts, just so the audience knows, where to go. If you have more of an interest in Spanish tennis, then, we'll have a podcast for that, for topics on Spanish type development and training, a podcast for technical and biomechanical questions and topics, and a podcast for junior development. So these are my three avenues that I'm kind of obsessed with. And this is my life's work, coaching and working with especially young children, but all ages, but particularly young prodigies and talented young kids. So I think that's kind of exciting, and that will make it easier to follow me, and people can kind of subscribe or follow whatever they want, whatever topics that interest them. And we'll try to parallel the podcast to the books that are coming out this year. I don't know if Winning Pretty will come out this year, but it may be 2025, or there may be some exciting news. We may do something digitally with video illustration for that book. Because when you think about it, the idea of publishing a book just printed on like a paperback book, printed on the page in today's era of technology and video technology. I have we have an idea. I have a proposal to possibly publish the book digitally in some form with visual video illustration, which would be fantastic. Imagine the book would be lavishly illustrated with video instead of just still photos. So I'm working on trying to get those details ironed out, but that could be very exciting too for those of you who like to use video. At the very least, we will have videos for all of the technical drills and videos for all the techniques and biomechanical checkpoints on the new book website, which will be the Winning Pretty is the working title. So stay tuned for more updates on that as I get through the book. But basically, I've been holed away writing a lot and thinking about technique and biomechanics. So if you have a technique or biomechanics question, my mind is in that realm right now. Go ahead and throw it out to me. If you have a question at any time, let me know. This show today is about technique and some biomechanics, mainly about junior development. I want to talk about the 15 principles to improve junior development and improve junior tennis technique in particular, and things that I see that sometimes some of them may make total sense to you and make common sense, and some of them may surprise you. And a lot of these things are topics that I see either mistakes that are made or errors that are not focused on enough that I work on with young kids that I think are really important. So let's get into it. I wrote this article for New York Tennis Magazine. It was published in this last month's edition of New York Tennis Magazine, which is a magazine here in the Northeast that I write for frequently. And I think it's got some good information for you guys, especially for parents or coaches. I know we have a lot of parents who do subscribe and listen and enjoy the show. So I think it's important to develop a great base. But a little bit differently than Steve Smith and the actual Great Base Alliance, I believe in a great base that's more modern and updated. That's a big part of the principle in my new book, Winning Pretty, is that the technique that we should build for kids should be modern, should be cutting edge, and should be based on the latest biomechanics. So I believe in a great base. I have great respect for Steve Smith and his life's work, sharing knowledge. He's a true student of the game and delivering content for free. You know, he runs a nonprofit, but some of the teaching methods and some of the biomechanical recommendations from the Great Base, I think are a little bit out of touch with modern science and research, and I just think that's unfortunately the way it is. But I do believe in a great base. I would like a modern great base. So that's my perspective. I want to see cutting edge biomechanics for young children. Similar to, I'm a big fan, and I follow the work very closely of Dr. Brian Gordon and Rick Macy, who have also pushed this concept, this topic, this idea of developing optimal technique, modern technique, cutting edge, evidence-based technique for young children. I essentially believe in that, and I think those two in particular, those leaders in the field, have done a tremendous job in the last 10 or 15 years promoting that idea of developing optimal technique based on evidence, based on the best research that we can have at this time, as flawed as it may be, and on the best biomechanical models that we have. So I'm a big believer in that. For me, the number one principle, of course, from a Spanish point of view, which is not really the place to go to study biomechanics. They're not very technical or biomechanical in Spain, which is odd because they have a very strong sports science department. They have many strong universities they have many strong trainers and sports science experts. But on the biomechanical side, on the coaching side, Spain tends to be very, very atechnical. I wouldn't say sometimes anti-technical. So for me, one of the most beautiful and important things that I've taken from Spain is to develop movement and to make movement skills a priority from day one with young children. I see that that is a big problem at many clubs where I observe coaches working. I observe kids taking classes and lessons. Movement and footwork is not a high priority. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the biggest reasons is it's not very popular, and a lot of kids don't want to move their feet. They don't want to run. And if I was a staff pro working at a club, I'd be in a tough situation, because if you start pushing kids to run and move and chase balls, and if teaching footwork requires discipline. I talk about this in Winning Pretty. And a lot of kids don't want that. A lot of parents don't even want that for their kids. And a lot of kids don't want to hear that message that they got to move. And they have to have really good activity or actividad in the legs and the feet. And so that can be quite an unpopular subject in your average, recreational club class, or any developmental class, even high performance classes. A lot of kids don't want to move. They don't want to move their feet. And that's one of the most beautiful principles that I've taken from Spain. And they're obsessed with movement in Spain. If you read The Secrets of Spanish Tennis, you'll see that that's a huge priority. Movement, agility, developing graceful flow on the court, fluidity, balance, all those things need to be developed in young kids from the very beginning. And they need to have a very high priority in the development. I have this tennis technique priority development triangle it's a model in my new book, Winning Pretty. And at the bottom of the triangle is movement skills and also ground stroke development. But movement skills is the base of the triangle, so important for kids. And what I also learned from studying with the great William Pato Alvarez, amazing Spanish coach who unfortunately has passed away, is that you want to try to clean the movement every day or regularly, if not every day. And that's something that is, far, far away from what happens in most American clubs and academies that I've seen. So cleaning the movement, cleaning the footwork every day is a huge thing for me. I'm doing it here with some of our full-time players. We have 3 full-time players here at the academy now who are homeschooled. Very exciting. So between writing and coaching, I've been super busy and just haven't been able to make many videos or podcasts. So I apologize for that. But cleaning the movement, taking players in 360 degrees, moving them left, laterally, right, laterally, deep and short, in and out, the Spanish way, and then teaching them all the details that they need in terms of footwork technique is huge, super important. So I would just say that is missing, and that's my number one principle to help juniors develop into world-class players. Like number one, movement skills, regularly cleaning the movement and footwork. So important. Number two, which you may not realize, we have a comment from a coach. We got a lot of coaches on the show, and I'm going to lose it. Okay, I got it. Thank you, Psycho Tennis. I know I appreciate your support. And did I lose the comment? Oh, I got it. I'm a coach from the UK, and the majority of coaches are stuck in the past technically and don't focus on movement at a young age. Yes, actually, I have many families from the UK who connect with me. I tried to help them remotely when they can't get to the States. I have a number of UK families who reach out to me, a number of UK coaches who reach out to me on my WhatsApp. You guys are welcome to connect with me on WhatsApp, share videos. My number is 914-462-2912, 914-462-2912, Chris Lewitt on WhatsApp. I have many families from around the world. They send me videos. I have a WhatsApp filled with videos of young, talented players, questions from coaches, questions from parents, and I always try to help. But it's very interesting for me actually to see players, young players, and their videos and how they're being developed around the world. But apparently the UK, this coach here says that they're kind of stuck in the past. They're not really teaching modern, cutting-edge technique, and I'm not surprised. I think the coaching education in the UK overall is like very, very strong. Most of the UK coaches whom I meet, they have very strong education and training, especially as you go through the levels that are required in the UK. But it's quite possible that much of the curriculum is not cutting edge, especially the emphasis on red, orange, green. I've had many parents complain to me how their kids are stuck in red, orange, green, and they're learning very rudimentary technique, kind of traditional technique, and For me, and in my new book, I really argue for cutting edge modern technique that's based on the latest biomechanical research and what we can see on the Pro Tour using high speed video analysis. I think that's really a main thrust of the book is let's teach kids the way the game is being played, and the game is being played very, very differently than it used to be. And all of that's based on high-speed video analysis and the research that's available. There's not a lot of research on biomechanics available, but we do the best we can with the evidence that we have. Number two, and this may surprise you, is to focus on topspin. And for me, topspin is not just a tactical thing or trying to bounce the ball up high and attack someone or to play it safe. For me, topspin is a technical priority. I try to get that going really early, believe it or not, sometimes from the very beginning. And because for me, it promotes a good swing path from underneath the ball and up. And it also helps me to develop elasticity. So one of the big thrusts in my new book, Winning Pretty, is that beautiful technique is elastic. And we should always try to create elastic, fluid technique. So that's what winning pretty means. It means that your technique is fluid, elastic, you have a good range of motion, and your strokes have a nice rhythm. And for me, working on topspin with young kids, it helps me get that. For example, if you cannot generate good topspin, you're probably pretty tight, you know. One moment, we have a question about cleaning. When you're cleaning, do you have a model player in your mind as coach for movement, or to help your kids have a standard and compare what you want the player to replicate? No, not one model player, but sometimes I'll use players as examples, like Alcaraz, who is very popular right now. His movement is extraordinary and beautiful, and Djokovic is a beautiful, beautiful mover. I definitely have favorite movers that I like, and I try to share those with the kids. Maybe I give them videos to watch. I'm really into like short clips on Instagram. I'll share a lot of Instagram videos or YouTube videos with my students to look at. I particularly like the movement of Alcaraz. On the women's side, I love the movement of Iga Swiatek, for example. So those are like some of my favorites. But basically, I have a footwork system that I developed over the years, just a methodology that is relatively simple and effective. Some of it's based on the work of David Bailey, whom I studied with. And I sort of tried to simplify his method of teaching footwork because I think he's brilliant, but his footwork method is a bit too complicated, even though it's very good. So and a lot of the footwork elements that I've learned come from Spain. So I've sort of created my own synthesis of footwork. I have a simple methodology that I use with all my students. I teach them the fundamentals that I move. The fundamentals that they will need to move well on the court and go to battle in high-level tournaments. So, but for me, those players that I mentioned are like the most beautiful movers, and there's many others as well. But those are a few that come to mind. So topspin for me is a huge priority. I could spend the whole show. I think I have done a podcast on developing topspin, but I link topspin with elasticity. And to me, elastic strokes are beautiful. They have a pretty component. And so that's sort of the linkage. That's the connection there. And so with young kids, I'm always trying to develop a looseness in their body, looseness in their arm or arms. And I want them to develop a nice topspin on the ball. And to me, that signifies that they are staying loose, not only to develop racket speed, but also to develop good spin. So spin and racket speed, those are two important things. To swing very hard, but as they progress in chance, you want spin with a power component. You don't just want a spinny ball that drops short. You want spin with power. So that becomes an important focus, because that is a danger of, if you just focus on spin, sometimes the kids don't hit through the ball enough. So moving along, because I want to get to all 15 if I can. If we don't get to all of them, we can always do another show. We could even do a half and half. It depends on how much you guys want to talk about each topic. But as I said, I think I have a whole show where I talk about developing topspin and keys there. It's in the archives. Number 3 is make it fun for young kids, but teach technique. I really believe that kids should learn technique. So the idea of just playing games or games-based approach, I think games have their place sometimes within like a maybe like in a sandwich model. Maybe you work on a technique, and then you go into a live ball format, an open format, and then you go back to some technical work in a closed format. Or, there is maybe a place for some games, but they have to be. For me, I like to make them technical games where the focus is on form and movement. And I just think that most kids between under 10, between the ages of 5 and 10, between the age of 8 and 12, a lot of their development classes are more like entertainment. They're being entertained, but they're not being trained very well. And so I have no problem with a coach being dynamic and fun and having a great sense of humor. I think that's really, really important. But the kids need training. They need to learn a good base of modern, cutting edge technique based on the latest biomechanical research. They need that. It shouldn't just be fun and games. So if you have so many parents who contact me and they send me videos of their kids' classes, and they're really not learning that much, and they're certainly not learning good movement and footwork. And I think that's a big mistake. Number 4. I talk about this in my new book, and I've written articles about this. We've done shows about the magician and the mechanic. Magician and mechanic just means it's a spectrum, like a scale that comes from Paul Anacone. It's not a scientific, research-based scale or spectrum, so it's not evidence-based. It's more based on coaching knowledge. What Paul wrote about, he has a chapter on magicians and mechanics in his book. And hold on, we have a quick question. A lot of questions today. I used to coach 6 national champs in Poland, and 2 of them went pro. Thanks for the comment. But I still struggle in learning the backhand. I don't know why. Any keys what you focus on from start to end on teaching the backhand? I'm assuming BH for you is the backhand. Well, I'm assuming you mean the two-handed backhand, Mojo. You mean for yourself, the backhand? You'd have to tell me. I mean, it's a pretty broad question, because two-handed backhand, I have a whole chapter. Actually, I'm in the middle of this chapter right now in my manuscript, Winning Pretty. The two-handed backhand is fascinating. The development of the two-handed backhand is really, really interesting. The shot has had seismic changes over the last decades, the backhand on the pro tour at the high level. You've seen a complete flip-flop, a reversal, where the majority of high-level players used to play with one hand, very conservative grips, used to slice and hit the ball pretty flat, to now, and two-handers were kind of an anomaly just 30, 40 years ago, not long ago, it's just several decades ago, decades going back. And now today you have, it's incredible. You have a lot of players who transition to a two-hander. Most players play with a two-hander. In fact, that's one of the topics in my principles here, that the one-hander may be dead. The one-hander is nearing extinction. The statistics for the one-hander are one-hander. But that statistically, based on the analytics, that the one-hander is very close to dying. So with the two-hander, to answer your question, there's a lot of technical details. I have a whole model of biomechanics. How do you teach them? Right. So it's more than I can tackle just this pod. But essentially, with the two-hander, a lot of times they fight, and you need to get a nice flow with both arms. Both arms need to flow in unison together. And I believe in developing more of the ATP type two-handed backhand, which has a compact range of motion, which is set to the outside. The hands are set to the outside, and I prefer the players to have kind of a type 3 setup. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Brian Gordon, but a type 3 setup is a very compact backswing, and there's an emphasis on developing lag through the stretch shortening cycle. And thanks, I appreciate that comment. So there's a tremendous focus on developing lag and using the stretch shortening cycle in the tendon and the muscular structures to develop racket head speed, very short range of motion. So that is like the the future model of the two-hander, and some female players play more with a type 2 swing, which is a slightly larger loop, and you still see that on tour. But the trend is definitely for the women to start playing more like the men with the ATP type, or sometimes it's called the ATP style backhand. And you see that almost 90% of the men on tour play like that. And according to Brian Gordon, almost 50% now of women are starting to play with that type of two-handed backhand. So if you're not familiar with the work and research of Brian Gordon, I would definitely point you in that direction. He has, I'm not sure where you can get his research. You can contact him directly. He's based in Miami and Boca, and his name is Brian Gordon. And he does have some resources on tennisplayer.net. Tennisplayer.net is a very, very good technical magazine published by John Yandel. John Yandel has been a great mentor of mine, and we've worked on many articles. We've written many articles together, and I'm a contributing editor for tennisplayer.net. That's the only site, tennisplayer.net, where you can get the research from Brian Gordon himself. There's a number of articles where you can actually get research on the ATP type backhand. Right. So yeah, with the left elbow, the question is about the left elbow and the position of the arms. The left elbow is bent. The right arm is more straight, pulled back, and the left elbow is in line with the side of your body. And you typically try to keep that elbow on the left side of your body, or as close as you can on the hitting side of the body. And then the left arm extends as you reach to the ball. A lot of women don't get that configuration. They don't get a full extension. But the bottom line, without getting too heavily into the biomechanics of the two-handed backhand, is most of the players that I work with, I have a method for teaching it that works really well. I explain that in the new book, Winning Pretty. So you're gonna have to wait a while for that to come out. I can put some videos out leading up to the book publication, but I like to set up a string, and then we work on getting the arms to flow, work on staying super relaxed and elastic in the arms, and I get the kids to whip the ball, and with a small backswing, compact range of motion, I get them to whip the ball over a high string, and that is like magic. That is amazing. So it's not like the way Rick Macy does it, where he takes the kids and he breaks them down really, really mechanically, and sometimes his players look kind of like robots. Although I have a ton of respect for Rick as a coach, a lot of times he goes into the surgery room with them, and he like makes them. He kind of, in a lot of ways, I think he builds too much stiffness, and the kids kind of look like they have kind of abrupt swings like a robot. What I do is try to get a nice flow in the arms, get the arms synchronized together. It's really important that the arms flow together. And then you keep their backswing on the hitting side. You keep the hands on the hitting side. You keep that left elbow as much as you can on the hitting side. And you work on whipping the ball up and over a high string for topspin. And that works like magic. I'm telling you, magic. And because the only way you can do it is by creating the lag. It's the only way you can get it up and over with topspin is with lag. And so you're not forcing the kids into lag. You're letting them get it on their own, but by providing them with parameters, and you're setting up a drill that helps them learn without you actually getting in there and performing detailed surgery, which can go wrong. I hope that helps, but I think you're going to have more questions because the two-hander is tricky. There's two arms working, one arm's pulled. You have contact point, lots of different contact points depending on different configurations. So the two-hander is quite complex when you start getting into the nitty-gritty of the biomechanics of it. And I have a big chapter on the two-handed backhand in my new book, and I'm enjoying just myself studying all the top players right now and engrossing myself in that chapter, because obviously as I'm writing, I'm also learning and growing with my own knowledge. But to me, I was surprised how complex the two-hander is, and there's a lot less information and research out there on the two-hander versus the ATP forehand. The ATP forehand has a lot of content. If you go to YouTube, or Brian Gordon's done a ton of research on the forehand, but there's not as much information out there to guide coaches on how to build poor quality. There's a lot of different wild suggestions on how to get the lag, how to get the arms working together, and I think there's a lot of pretty dubious information out there in terms of content on YouTube and online about how to teach and build a two-handed backhand. So I think that that's an interesting question that you brought up, because I think that is an area that needs to be cleared up more. Needs to be a more clear model on how to build it, and maybe a model that's not just the way that like Rick Macy supports doing it, which is a little bit kind of mechanical and robotic. Maybe I think I'm trying to propose in my book a new way to build the two-hander that has a bit more flow and elasticity, still gets the lag, still gets the range of motion that you want, small range of motion, gets the fast racket speed in a small package, but does it in more of a shall I say, in a pretty way, in a flowing way, in a fluid way, rather than having like these kind of like stiff checkpoints that the kids have to go through, which sometimes creates a stiff kind of robotic looking swing. Anyway, I hope that helps. I'll have to get back to your question so I can complete the show. But Mojo, you're welcome. Just shoot me a WhatsApp or shoot me an email, and I have lots of people who follow the show, and they shoot me questions all the time. So if you have a question on the two-hander, I'll be happy to help you out. But I think you make a great point, because the two-hander really needs, coaches need help teaching that. And a lot of times the two-hander can end up looking robotic or stiff, and the right arm can dominate. So that's what you got to watch out for. You got to get a nice synchronization in the arms, nice flow in the arms, and you don't want to have the front arm, the dominant arm, dominating the stroke. So we were talking about magicians and mechanics, and that comes from the work of Paul Anacone. He talks about magicians and mechanics in his book. Basically, magicians are more creative, artistic type players who learn more with open drills and games and competing. And mechanics are the opposite. Mechanics are analytical players who benefit more from lots of repetition and drilling, and they like closed type drills. So I just think it's so important to figure out what type of player you have. I've done whole shows on this. I have a chapter in my book on this topic, my forthcoming book, Winning Pretty. I have written articles about magicians and mechanics, and you can also reference Paul Anacone's book. He has a book that came out with a chapter on magicians and mechanics, and he talks about it a lot. You can search him for videos on YouTube as well, where he talks about magicians and mechanics. I've taken that concept where Paul works with ATP players. I work more with young prodigy type players. I've taken that scale and that spectrum and brought it down to junior development. And I see the same thing in junior development. Kids who love to drill, and they love analytics. They love to talk about details, and those kids are very, very mechanical. And you have other kids who really hate that. They hate drilling. They don't like to do the repetitions, and they really thrive in a more open, games-based environment as much as you can give them. Those kids still need to be pushed towards the middle to be balanced, and sometimes mechanical players need to be pushed towards the middle to be more magician-like. So you strive for balance, but you got to know what you're working with. If you have a true magician, you can't just drill them all day long. They're gonna hate their life. And if you have a mechanic and you're doing lots of open games-based exercises, they're gonna hate that too. So I just think it's so important to know what type of kid you have, what type of player you're working with. And if you have a group, you really need to know what is the makeup of your group in terms of personality and learning style, because it's going to be real hard to structure that group well. If you've got like a couple magicians and a couple mechanics, you're going to have some really unhappy people depending on how you structure a group class. So I think that's really important. All right, number 5, I don't want you guys to get mad at me or think that I'm crazy, but number 5 is don't worry about burnout. And as you may or may not know, I'm very ambitious with my students, and we work very hard. We play a lot of hours on the court, and I'm a big believer in that. I believe that if you want to be great, if you want to be a champion, you need to train. You need to train a lot. So I don't have a lot of fear about burnout. But number 6, before you think I'm a maniac and irresponsible, number 6 is you should worry about injuries. So injuries, I have a lot of fear of injury, and I'm heavily focused on injury prevention. And so I try to blend those two together. I don't worry about limiting a kid's play. I want the kids to play as much as they want to be on the court. You know, not like you should not be dragging a kid to the court, but if a kid wants to play, I don't care if they're 6, 7, 8 years old, whatever. I'll let them play as many hours as they want. I do want them to be doing injury prevention, and I do want to monitor for example, how much they're serving, because that can be, I can overload the shoulder and the rotator cuff. So overhand work should be monitored. But essentially, ground strokes, volleys, movement, those areas for me are low risk. And I think kids can play a lot of volume, a lot of hours per week in those areas without risk of injury or burnout. And I think that their kid will burn out psychologically and maybe hate the game down the road. But those kids probably never going to be great. Like a lot of those parents just want the kid to be maybe a college player or just to be a good player. But if you want a player to win Grand Slams, if you want a player to be a top elite international player in the world, you're going to have to take some risk. And I've never had one top player with really ambitious kid and parent who didn't play a lot of volume. You got to go for it, and you have to take the chance. Is there a chance you might get injured? Yeah, unfortunately it is. Is there a chance that you might hit some feelings of burnout and need to take a break or time off, get your mind back? It's possible, but you're never going to be great unless you push the limits and play a lot. You have to hit a lot of balls, thousands and thousands of balls, and you have to do that religiously and regularly. And that's the way to greatness. I really believe that strongly. So without risk, there's no reward. If you want to be great, I'm talking about top in the world, you're going to have to play a lot, and you're going to have to really push the limits, and you're going to have to pray that your kid doesn't get hurt and doesn't burn out. And some kids make it through that, and some kids don't, unfortunately. But if your goal is to be a college player, D3 or D1 even, or just a good player, you don't need to take those risks. You can play two sports, which I think I talk about next. You can limit the amount of court time that your kid's doing, and you can play it really safe, and you will develop a good player with a lower injury and burnout risk profile. So it just depends on what your goals are. But if your goal is the top of the top, greatest in the world, the Serenas, the Federers, the Djokovic's, the Nadals, you got to play a lot, and it's just going to be, you're going to have to take that risk and pray that your kid doesn't burn out or get hurt. Hopefully they love the game enough. You make it fun for them. They're playing a lot. You make it fun for them, and you're very careful to prevent them from getting hurt, and you limit them in the best you can. So related to 5 and 6, I talk about cross training for multiple sports. There's a common recommendation that kids should always play more than one sport. They should always play tennis and something else. It's healthier for their bodies. And I think that's fair. There's a lot of sports science supporting that. But I think there's also a bias and a little bit of a myth regarding that, because a lot of kids just love tennis. And I think it's fine to just play tennis. I have many top young kids, and they love tennis, and they don't want to play anything else. And as long as I have them on a really good athletic training program where they're getting a full athletic conditioning and they're working on developing a healthy body, healthy athletic body, I don't see a problem with just playing tennis. You can play tennis all you want. Play 20 hours or 30 hours or whatever you want to play if you want to be great. And just make sure you're doing a lot of injury prevention. Make sure that you're doing good athletic training off the court. And it makes no sense to me to force a kid to play another sport if they're not so inclined. Now, if you have a kid who happens to love basketball, I played basketball a long time. I love basketball and tennis. If you have a kid that likes soccer, or, there's a lot of examples of professional players who did play two sports for a number of years. There's a way to do that. But at some point, the other sport starts to interfere with your growth and development and the speed at which you grow and develop as a tennis player, and it has to be shut down. So you just can't do that for too long. But if you have a kid who loves multiple sports, that's great. There's a lot of sports science that supports that shows that that's a healthy way to develop an athlete. I've done a whole show on this where I talk about the myth of playing multiple sports. So if you're interested in that topic, I have a whole podcast where probably an hour long where I talk about that, and you can check that in the archive. I have no problem with a kid playing one sport or even two sports as long as they're getting enough tennis time, which is sometimes hard to get. And I have no problem with a kid who just loves tennis and wants to play tennis as long as they're doing athletic training off the court and good injury prevention. I don't think a kid should just be hitting, 20 hours a week, 25 hours a week of tennis balls and doing nothing else. I think that is highly irresponsible. It's okay to specialize early. And as you can imagine, this is principle number 8. Specialization, early specialization. This is another hot topic in research for young athletes in the sports science realm. Is it better to specialize early or late? In general, I think tennis is an early specialization sport, especially for girls. There are girls turning pro 13, 14, 15 years old, 16 years old. We see girls in the top 100. To me, that's obviously an early specialization sport. And for girls, they can be training on the professional track, as young as 5, 6 years old, with that goal in mind, because that's less than 10 years away for them. And for boys, it's slightly delayed, a couple years. But essentially, tennis, I think, in general, is earlier in specialization. That's how you become great at tennis. Does that mean it's the only way to go to the top? No, because there's more than one pathway, like I said before, with multiple sports or one sport. I don't like to say it needs to be this way or it must be that way. I think that I would not be afraid to play a lot of tennis at a young age and specialize if that's what the kid loves. If the kid loves it, do that. Just make sure they're getting injury prevention. Make sure you're attending to their overall athletic development off the court. And thanks for the comment. It just slipped by there, but I appreciate it. And that's kind of how I feel about these 4 principles here. Don't worry about burnout. Worry about injuries. Cross-training multiple sports is good, but not required. It's okay to specialize early. Like, to me, those 4 principles are really big ones. And I mean, they can warrant their own shows, like I said. And those are probably fiery topics, yeah, there is some research. I have to check that, Mojo. I'll check that later, that comment. But I'm saying the research is mixed. I'm telling you, you can find the research. There's a lot of research that supports multiple sports, but I can also find, there's lots of examples of players who are successful and they only played tennis and they developed in a healthy way. But those 4 are big. So just like, if you think about that as a parent or a coach, where do you stand philosophically? Do you agree? Do you disagree? These are kind of heated, controversial topics. Burnout risk, injury risk, multiple sports or not, specialize early or not, kind of big topics. And as a parent or a coach, you need to know, what are you going to do with your own kid or with your students? What do you believe? And I just think it's a very important area of discussion. And you may or may not agree with me. And as I said, I would definitely support trying to follow the evidence as best you can, the research as it's helpful. But sometimes you have a limited amount of research, scarce research, and sometimes you have research studies that are conflicting, or there may not be enough research on a certain topic to have a definitive answer. And in some cases, the research conflicts with the experience in the field. And so you may need to wait for research to come to a different place. So, that being said, I respect all parents and coaches who have a different view, but I have a clearer view in my mind about how I want to develop a talented junior, a prodigy, and I'm also open to, when I have parents who come to work with me, I have many very intense parents who are running the show, and we work together to find the optimal plan for their player. It's not like the player comes and I say, has to be like this, has to be like this. I have a clear view of what I want, but I also respect parents so much, and I work with dozens of really, really intense, smart parents who want the best for their kids, very ambitious parents, and we just come to an agreement. Okay, how much are we going to play? How are we going to specialize? Are we going to have an off-court injury prevention program? There's some places where I'll put my foot down and some places where I bend. And I think that's what great coaches do with parents. They respect parents and they work with parents. It's one of the things Rick Macy does incredibly well with young parents. He gets a lot of criticism from some people in the coaching community about this or that or whatever. But one of his great strengths, he has a number of great strengths as a coach, is he works incredibly well with parents, and he works with parents as a team, like a partnership, rather than like shutting parents down or shutting parents out of the kicking parents off the court, and he has great communication with parents, and I think that's a huge strength of Rick's, and it's one of the reasons why he's a legendary coach. So moving on to number 9, which I think is really interesting, and I believe it's possible to identify talent early. I'm sorry about this comment. I appreciate it. I will check some of the comments after. I just want to get through the 15 principles, and then if you have a question that I didn't get to, please shoot it to me like by WhatsApp or email, because I just don't want to go too long with the show. We try to keep the show under an hour, and really I'd like to do more podcasts that are like maybe 30 minutes or so. But number 9 is I believe it's possible to identify talent. Here's where the research maybe is contradictory. A lot of sports science research says that it's really hard pre-puberty to identify anything, like in terms of like predicting an athlete's potential. But in my experience, I don't necessarily agree. I think that you can see some foot speed, you can see some things with hand-eye coordination, you can see some things with the mind, the way a kid's wired, the way they compete. Obviously, all of those things change as the kids develop. Even like some natural power that a child has, timing, the ability to learn is another gift. I think there are talents that you can identify. Some talents may change a lot as the kid goes through puberty and develops, and some may always be there, like they may be like the essence that's there. But I think you can see some of those things in a young kid, and you can identify a kid who's doing those things really well. It doesn't guarantee that they're going to be great, but I think you can a lot of times identify talent pre-puberty. And I know that there are a bunch of sports scientists who probably disagree with that statement, but as a coach in the field, I think there's a way to find talent, number 10, I believe that quality repetitions unlock technique, and that you need essentially thousands and thousands of repetitions to be great. I agree with Steve Smith on this, with the Great Base Initiative. Repetition. You have to get a kid to be willing to do enough repetitions at a young age to fully automate their strokes, their technique, to myelinate the movements that they need so that they can become essentially as close to machines as they can with their strokes and with their movement. And that just takes, every kid is different. Some people with more talent don't need as many repetitions. So there's like an inverse relationship between talent and the amount of repetitions that you need. If you got a lot of talent, motoric talent, all right, there's different types of talent. Talent has many definitions. When we're talking about principle number 9, is it possible to identify talent? Some talents are identifiable, some may shift over time. But for example, just your motoric ability, your ability to mimic and learn a movement with your motor system, your neuromuscular system. People who are very gifted motorically, they don't need as many repetitions. So it's a blessing for them. They don't have to do the thousands and thousands that other kids have to do. But essentially, wherever you're at in terms of talent, motoric talent, you're going to need to do a pretty good amount of reps. And if you're not that motorically gifted, you may be gifted in other departments. For example, I've had top national rank kids who are really not that gifted motorically, but they're very gifted in other areas as an athlete, and they had to put in the work, with the drills, ball machine, hitting against the wall. Those are the things that give you the repetitions, and they have to be quality repetitions. They have to be really focused repetitions. They can't be sloppy repetitions. That's what creates a champion technique. That's what creates great strokes and movement, world-class strokes and movement. You can get that with a coach drilling, a parent drilling, a wall. A wall is probably the greatest asset that you have as a young tennis player. A ball machine, in the high-tech age that we live in, ball machines are amazing. So there's a lot of ways to get that, but you got to be willing to put in the hours and hours, countless hours of developing repetition, and it has to be good quality repetition. So that is really the key to becoming a world-class player at a young age, you need technical guidance. You can't just do it on your own. You probably, if you're on your own or you're a parent, you should film everything with the technology that we have now, with the cameras in everyone's phones. You should film everything and make sure the technique is correct. The last thing you want to do is thousands and thousands of repetitions, something the wrong way or something that could cause an injury and mess up your kid. So the key is thousands of repetitions to become a machine, but the right way and with focus. Some kids have a talent for focusing and zoning in and doing that type of work, and some kids they just have a hard time doing the reps well. They have a hard time staying focused, and they don't become great. They're just not able to put in the work the way some other kids are, unfortunately. Now, that is a talent, being able to focus and do your reps, do your work. Number 11, I think it's smart to start with conservative grips. Sometimes I go back and forth on this between Eastern and semi-Western, let's say, for the forehand. On the backhand side, same thing with the non-dominant hand, Eastern or semi-Western. I've gone through different phases where I started kids with an Eastern, I started kids with a semi-Western. I've definitely noticed when I start kids with a semi-Western, sometimes there's a risk of slipping. It can slip, the palm can slip under the handle and they can develop a Western grip that I have to change later on sometimes. And so I think the adage from the great American coach Robert Lansdorp is still applicable. And he said that start kids closer to an Eastern grip and let them slide over to a semi-Western if they must. And I just think that's age-old advice, classic advice from Lansdorp, and it's probably pretty good rule to live by. Kind of start closer to an Eastern or composite grip, and then if it slides a little bit to semi-Western, it's not the end of the world. The issue is that a lot of kids are in the semi-Western and they start slipping over and over. And if they're young, it's hard with some kids, not all kids, it's hard to get through the developmental years. You have from 9, 10, 11, 12. It's like a gauntlet. It's hard to get through those years without a lot of slipping and developing a full Western. And it sucks to have to fight that. As a coach, it's a pain in the ass to always have to battle with a kid about their grip every day or after every tournament they come back from. And you might be just better off, like Lansdorp says, going with the Eastern. But, sometimes I go back and forth, because when you start a kid with semi-Western, and I've said this in other podcasts, it's easier to learn some spin, which I think is an important priority too. So for me, it's an interesting debate. Definitely, if you're in the Eastern to semi-Western area, you're in the right neighborhood, and for a forehand and for the non-dominant hand on the backhand, two-handed backhand. Nobody hits a one-hander anymore, so I think that's my next principle here. And I got that coming up. We'll talk about that controversial topic. But essentially, if you do start the kids with a semi-Western, and I'm guilty of this as well, you're just going to have to watch that grip pretty carefully, especially after tournaments like outdoors, somewhere on clay. You're just going to have to watch it like a hawk, and you may have to do some remedial work. You have to be careful, more cautious with that approach. So number 12, here's where we're talking about the ATP backswings, ATP type swings. Some people call it the ATP style. It's not really a style. This is an optimal biomechanical model. So for me, a better terminology would be ATP type swings, which basically for me, there's different definitions, but it indicates a small range of motion using the stretch shortening cycle, creating lag in the racket head to create a lot of power, the same or more power in a short range of motion. That's to me what ATP type swings are. So that's on the forehand and the backhand. I think with young kids, it's a huge debate. It's a big topic in my new book, Winning Pretty. Huge debate about when should you teach that? Should you teach that to young kids? For example, young kids under 10, should you wait? Does the ATP type swing evolve over time? Many times it does, sometimes it does not. You have people like Brian Gordon, leaders in the field, Rick Macy, who are teaching ATP type swings to kids as young as 5, 6 years old, and they say it works. Sometimes I'm incredulous about that because I've worked with many kids who struggled to develop that ATP type backswing on both sides, forehand and backhand, and I've had some successes. I would say the successes are more rare than the failures. But failure is not, I don't like that word failure because there's many great players with the type 2 swing. Type 2 is kind of a moderate size range of motion in the backswing with some multi-segmentation of the racket, basically with some use of the stretch shortening cycle, but it's also a little loopier in the backswing. There are lots of successful players, especially female players, who use a type 2 swing. They don't have an ATP style and they're doing great. So with young kids, I say try to get the racket on the hitting side. Have a more sensible approach. Not force every kid to be ATP. It can be too much for some kids. You try, you see if it works, and if not, you settle for something like a type 2 backswing where the racket is a moderate size backswing, moderate size range of motion, and then you try to work on it over time rather than like putting every kid in the surgical room and forcing them into that short backswing, forcing them into that mold, which is a very it's a very abrupt way to teach a young kid. Some kids can do it and some kids cannot, in my experience. So that's what I would recommend. Try to get it. If you get lucky and the kids show some ability to do that, work with it. You might be able to get it. I have a young girl, 8 years old right now. She's hitting beautiful ATP type strokes, forehand and backhand, but it's not easy. It's hard. It's a difficult skill to develop. And if you have lots of kids with type 2 swings, I think that's okay. What I would watch out for is the type 1 swings. We want the type 3 swings. Type 3 is the shortest range of motion. Type 1 swings are like those huge bubble loops where kids are reaching back all the way across their bodies. Their racket's parallel to the baseline on both sides. I would definitely discourage that and try to limit those types of backswings. Try to get the kid a little more compact, get a cleaner path from the racket to the ball, shorter pathway from the racket to the ball. And then sort of over time, you can encourage them to work on that more and more compact ATP type swing. To me, that is like the most sensible way to approach that for young kids. And I think it's healthier in most cases for young kids. It's better for their development, both emotionally and also physically. But that's up for debate. It's a really fascinating debate. You have people like Brian Gordon and Rick Macy who say that basically everyone can learn this optimized technique no matter what their age, no matter what their level. And then you have, I'm sort of proposing a more middle of the road approach. And then there are people on the other side who say it doesn't matter, don't teach that. The contact points what matters, the extensions what matters. Other things are way more important than the backswing. Why are we even talking about the ATP backswing? It's not even a thing. So you have like a very interesting debate here about mechanics, biomechanics, swing technique, and how to teach it to young kids. I find it fascinating. It's a big part of my new book, and I could talk a lot more about it, but I just want to wrap up the show. So number 13, the principle is that tennis is an aerial game. John Yandel talks about this a lot. John Yandel is a leading video analyst of professional tennis players and high-speed video analysts. The game is aerial. No one can argue with that. The game has become more and more aerial. And I just think we should teach it that way. We should stop forcing kids to be on the ground. Kids should learn how to load and explode in a controlled way. I've done whole shows on this, but basically kids should learn how to jump. They should learn how to jump on the serve. They should learn how to jump on the forehand and backhand when needed. Not all the time, but basically tennis has evolved into an aerial game, and it should be taught that way. And actually, there's a lot of positives that come from learning how to jump and use your kinetic chain to get off the ground that I've also talked about and written about in numerous places, where when you learn to use your legs and hips to leave the ground, it really promotes good trunk rotation, good hip rotation, and good use of the kinetic chain. So I just think there's so many benefits developmentally. And just remember, I believe in teaching technique the way the game is played now in the modern era. And to me, you see a clear evolution of the technical game to becoming more aerial, more airborne, looking from, let's say, the 1970s until now, 2020s now. The game has evolved into a game that's oftentimes, the players are oftentimes using techniques in the air. Part of that's because of the racket technology, technical evolution, where players are hitting with more RPM, more high bouncing balls, things like that. And the players have adapted their technique. So why aren't we teaching that? I don't agree with teaching kids to be stuck to the ground all the time when the whole game has become airborne. Number 14, and we touched on it earlier, is that the one-handed backhand is dead or almost dead. Please don't get mad at me. I love the one-handed backhand. It's my favorite shot. My coach Gilad Bloom taught it to me the Israeli way. I love it. It's beautiful. It is the most beautiful shot in tennis. So winning pretty, but people aren't winning pretty with the one-hander anymore. The statistics are terrible for the one-handed backhand on tour. About 1% of women in the top 1,000 WTA play with the one-hander currently. About 4.5% of the men, so 45 plus or minus, these are rough numbers, play with a one-handed backhand on the ATP Tour of the men in the top 1,000. Like, that statistic is damning. That statistic is shocking. I couldn't believe it when I read it. I assume that those numbers are fairly close to reality. I haven't done the actual counting myself. You can, if anyone knows, has done that counting, let me know. But if that's true, I think it really sounds the death knell for the one-handed backhand, unless something dramatically changes with surfaces or technical evolution or some technological change on tour. I think more and more players are just going to adopt the two-hander. Very, very few female players play with a one-hander. I wouldn't feel really responsible teaching a one-hander to most kids now. I never used to say it in the past. I've been a huge fan of the one-hander for years. I've stood up for the one-hander, for many years now, and I've always believed 20% of the kids. I teach many kids one-hander, but the more you look at the way the trend is going, I just think the one-hander is in big trouble. And I think there's really important biomechanical reasons. When you study the biomechanics of the one-hander, the range of motion, the better stability that you have with the two hands, the the advantage in range of motion that you have with the two hands, the advantage on the return of serve. There's a number. I have a whole chapter about this in Winning Pretty, my forthcoming book, and it's a really interesting topic. There's just some key biomechanical advantages that the two-hander brings that I'm not sure the one-hander can keep pace now with the way the modern game is, the speed of the modern game, the power of the modern game, the time, the lack of time that you have with the modern game, lateral movement and open stances with the two-hander better than the one-hander, for example. Things like that. I think those are real, factual, biomechanical reasons why you see so few players, professional players, adopting a one-hander nowadays. I think they're legitimate and really those biomechanical differences are I think hard to argue with, difficult to debate against well. So there's a lot more there to talk about and unpack, but just think about some of those. There's a reason why 1%, 4%, 4.5% players using a one-hander. There's got to be some really good reasons why most pros want to go into battle with two hands nowadays. And this is coming from me. I love the one-hander. I've always supported the one-hander. And I think this is a topic where I'm starting to shift my position, as you just have to face facts. You have to face the numbers. And you have to admit that, look, this is a stroke that is dying. It's not winning, even though it's incredibly pretty. Principle number 15, teach on-the-rise skills early. So this is really important for junior development, especially if you have a young prodigy, if you have a young talented kid, if you have a little tiger, boy or girl. They're going to be playing up in the age divisions. They're going to be playing, if they're 8, they might be playing 12s or 14s or even higher. If they're 6, they might be playing 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or whatever. So if you have a talented little kid, they've got to learn really good on the rise. And if they do, they can hold the line and play with anybody. They could play with Djokovic. They could play with Alcaraz. They could play with Swiatek. They can play with adults. They can play with any older kids who try to bounce the ball over their heads. It's super critical. If you want to have a prodigy who can hang with older, stronger players and play up 2, 3, 4 divisions, like the great prodigies always do that, they have to have an amazing on-the-rise game. So they got to have the timing and the skills and the footwork to take the ball on the rise. A very simple reason is little kids who are advanced, they're always going to get moonball in the older age divisions, players are going to try to hit the ball over their head because that's where they're weakest. And so you're just going to need that when you're sending your little little superstar into battle. They have to be able to take the ball on their ice. So when the kids are young, you have to start developing that. Even if you teach them to go back the Spanish way and play defense, I'm all for that. You've got to teach those kids to take the ball on the rise. They have to take the ball early to protect against the moon ball, and so that they can compete with anybody of any size. The only way little Prodigy is going to beat a giant is by taking the ball super early, picking the ball off the baseline, and not letting anyone beat them with high balls. That's just a fact. Guys, if you enjoyed the program, I hope you did. It's great to be back. I can't promise how many shows we're going to do this spring. As you can see, I'm in crazy book land, editing, I have working with my publisher, the Secrets of Spanish Tennis book, the Winning Pretty Technique book. There's a lot of stuff going on. We also have training all the time. I'm on the court. When I'm not writing, I'm on the court or with my family. Like, there's no time for anything else. I'm obsessed with these books and coaching my students on the court. If you are interested in training with me, don't forget, we're doing lots of summer signups right now. We've got an incredible summer camp coming up in the beautiful mountains of Vermont. You can learn how to win pretty in like the most prettiest place in the world in the summer. Amazing sleepaway camp, high performance camp for serious kids. So if you're interested in that, just contact me and I can send you all the information about our summer camp programs. We have kids coming from all over the country. We have international kids coming to the middle of nowhere here in the mountains to train with me. It's pretty awesome. And I am training kids all the time. Every week I have currently 3 full-time players living here, homeschooled players. We are looking for more homeschooled players who can train full-time, twice a day, many hours per week to try to be professionals or top college players. So I'm looking for players like that. If you happen to have a young player like that, please get in touch with me. And looking for families to move here to beautiful Manchester, Vermont, have full access to my club, full access to indoor and outdoor courts, gym for free, and to train with me every day and just develop into superstars. I'm looking for more kids and families who want to do that. So please consider that. It was a great show. Guys, God bless, and I'll see you on the next program.